The Academy's Awakening. The vast training complex of the Zarin Military Academy on Xin Prime stretched across hectares of metallic landscape, its geometric precision a testament to the Empire's technological sophistication. Within its gleaming corridors, generations of warrior scholars were forged, their potential honed through rigorous training in genetic enhancement. On this particular cycle, the atmosphere buzzed with an electricity that transcended the standard institutional protocols. Rows of young alien recruits, their scaled skin reflecting the artificial illumination in a mesmerizing display of iridescent greens, golds, and deep blues, moved with a restless anticipation that defied their military conditioning. General Kaylor's impending lecture was no ordinary event. Whispers rippled through the ranks, hushed conversations that spoke of a war veteran whose reputation had become almost mythological. Some spoke of his legendary battles with a mixture of reverence and skepticism, while others viewed his stories as exaggerated tales meant to inspire fear and respect. Trevi, a particularly tall and broad-shouldered Zarin recruit, represented the prevalent attitude of youthful arrogance. His scaled skin, a deep emerald that signified his elite genetic lineage, shimmered with an almost dismissive energy. He leaned toward his training companion, his voice deliberately pitched to carry. A great general. Trevi's subvocal translator carried a note of contempt. He looks more like a relic than a warrior. How can someone so old understand modern combat? The recruit's companion, a more reserved Zarin named Lyra, subtly shifted her posture. Her mottled gray-blue scales suggested a more analytical disposition. Perhaps, she responded carefully, experience holds wisdom we have not yet comprehended. When General Kaylor entered, the room's energy transformed instantaneously. His ash-gray skin, marked with intricate battle scars, told a story far more compelling than any verbal narrative. Each ridge and line etched into his form was a testament to survival, to battles fought and survived against impossible odds. His movements were calculated, each step deliberate, each gesture weighted with meaning. Unlike the young recruits whose bodies thrummed with potential energy, Kaylor moved with the precision of a weapon that had been tested and proven in the most unforgiving of environments. The recruits, for all their initial bravado, found themselves instinctively straightening, their earlier casual postures dissolving under the weight of his gaze. General Kaylor's eyes, deep-set and unyielding, seemed capable of dissecting not just physical form, but the very essence of their martial spirit. I have stood on 100 battlefields, Kaylor began, his voice low but resonant, each word carefully chosen and laden with experience. I have faced enemies who towered over me, enemies who could tear through armor with a single blow, and enemies who wielded weapons so advanced they seemed like magic. Yet none were more formidable than the humans of Earth. The statement hung in the air, a challenge that demanded attention. Murmurs of disbelief and indignation immediately rippled through the crowd. How could these soft-skinned, apparently primitive beings from a seemingly insignificant planet be considered more dangerous than the advanced warrior races of the known galaxy? Trevi, unable to contain his skepticism, was the first to vocalize the collective doubt. Humans, he interjected, his tone dripping with incredulity. The soft-skinned primitives with no natural armor, no claws, no psionic abilities. What could they possibly have that makes them formidable? General Kaylor's gaze locked onto Trevi, an intense focus that seemed to strip away the young recruit's outer bravado. You speak, he responded, as one who has never faced them. But you will listen. For I did not come here to argue. I came to teach. The challenge was clear. The lesson was about to begin. Battlefield Origins. The projection behind General Kaylor flickered to life, revealing a landscape that seemed to breathe with the memory of violence. Ravaged fields, a name that had become synonymous with one of the most unexpected turning points in the Zarin-human conflict. When the Zarin Empire first set its sights on Earth, Kaylor began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that drew the cadets into the narrative. We believed it would be a swift conquest. Our technological superiority was unquestionable. Our fleet was incomparable. Our biological enhancements made us nearly invincible. The holographic display showed a series of strategic maps, Zarin invasion routes, projected points of resistance, estimated time to complete planetary subjugation. Each projection looked clinical, almost mathematical in its precision. The blue-tinged holograms represented Zarin forces, overwhelmingly dominant across every conceivable metric. Intelligence reports suggested minimal resistance, Kaylor continued, a hint of irony threading through his words. Earth was a planet divided, struggling with internal conflicts, technological limitations, and environmental challenges. On paper, we had already won before the first shot was fired. Lyra, seated near the front, leaned forward. Her analytical mind was already parsing the inconsistencies in the narrative. The discrepancy between the projected outcome and the general's tone suggested a story far more complex than a simple military briefing. The hologram shifted, revealing grainy footage of human defensive positions. Makeshift barricades constructed from scrap metal, concrete fragments, and what appeared to be repurposed industrial equipment. To the Zarin eyes, trained to see advanced energy shields and nano-constructed defenses, these looked pathetically primitive. Our first major engagement was at the Jansen Ridge, Kaylor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A desolate place. Ash-covered ground. Jagged rock formations. Terrain that should have favored our advanced mobility systems and long-range weaponry. The cadets leaned in, their earlier skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. Trevi, who had been the most vocal critic, now sat with an intensity that betrayed his growing interest. Kaylor described the initial assault. Zarin drop ships, each capable of deploying hundreds of enhanced warriors, descended through the atmosphere. Their bio-augmented soldiers wore armor that could deflect plasma rounds, had built-in medical nanites, and communication systems that functioned across multiple spectrums. We outnumbered the human defenders 5-1, he said. Victory should have been inevitable. But it wasn't. The humans had transformed the landscape into a weapon. Every rock became potential cover. Every depression in the terrain could hide a trap. They had studied the ground with a geological intimacy that transformed the battlefield into a living, breathing defensive system. They didn't fight like any enemy we had encountered, Kaylor explained. When their initial defensive line was breached, they didn't retreat in standard military formation. Instead, they dispersed. Used the terrain. Created kill zones that negated our numerical superiority. The hologram showed small human units moving with a fluidity that seemed almost organic. They weren't just defending, they were adapting, using every available resource with an improvisational brilliance that defied conventional military doctrine. Their weapons were crude by our standards, Kaylor continued. Kinetic rifles. Explosives cobbled together from industrial materials. Electromagnetic disruptors built in workshops that would barely qualify as maintenance sheds in our infrastructure. But crude did not mean ineffective. The humans had developed weapons specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses in Zarin technology. EMP charges that could temporarily disable advanced shield systems. Fragmentation rounds that could penetrate bio-augmented armor at specific molecular stress points. What they lacked in technological sophistication, Kaylor said, they compensated for with precision, creativity, and an understanding of their environment that turned every battle into a complex, three-dimensional chess match. The projection showed a particularly harrowing sequence. A small human unit, surrounded and seemingly defeated, using a combination of terrain, improvised explosives, and coordinated tactical movement to not just survive, but inflict significant casualties on a much larger Zarin force. They didn't just fight, Kaylor emphasized. They reimagined the very concept of warfare. As the holographic display faded, the room remained in stunned silence. The cadets, young warriors who had been raised on tales of Zarin military supremacy, were witnessing a narrative that challenged everything they believed about conflict, about strength, about victory. Kaylor's gaze swept across the room. He had planted a seed of doubt, of curiosity. And he was just beginning to tell his story. Tactical ingenuity. The Academy's holographic projection system hummed to life, casting a soft blue glow across the faces of the attentive cadets. General Kaylor stood at the center, a living monument to survival, his scarred form a testament to battles fought and lessons learned. Tactical ingenuity, Kaylor began, is not about the weapons you possess, but how you perceive the battlefield. The projection shifted, revealing a complex topographical map of a region that looked simultaneously alien and familiar. Jagged mountain ranges cut through barren landscapes, with small clusters of human settlements nestled in valleys that seemed impossible to defend. The humans understood something fundamental that our military strategists overlooked, Kaylor explained. Warfare is not just about overwhelming force, it's about understanding your environment, your enemy, and most crucially, yourself. A younger cadet named Zara, her scales a mottled blue-green that indicated her analytical training, raised a clawed hand. "General," she asked carefully, "how could a technologically inferior species develop tactics that could challenge an interstellar empire?" Kaylor's lips curved into what might have been a smile, a rare expression for a warrior who had seen countless battles. "Necessity," he responded. "Desperation. And an evolutionary history that made their entire planet a crucible of survival." The hologram began to display a series of ecological and geological maps of Earth. Volatile tectonic plates. Extreme weather patterns. Environments that ranged from scorching deserts to freezing Arctic regions. Predatory ecosystems that demanded constant adaptation. Humans evolved on what we would classify as a death world, Kaylor continued. A planet so inherently hostile that most species would have perished. Yet they not only survived, they thrived. Every challenge became a lesson in innovation. The projection zoomed into a specific engagement, the Battle of Granite Pass. What initially looked like a simple mountain terrain revealed itself as a meticulously planned defensive network. Human forces had transformed the natural landscape into a complex system of kill zones, communication networks, and adaptive defensive positions. "Look closely," Kaylor instructed the cadets. "Notice how they used the terrain. Every rock. Every elevation change. Every potential choke point." The hologram displayed multiple tactical layers. Seismic sensors disguised as ordinary stones. Communication relays hidden within natural rock formations. Defensive positions that could be rapidly reconfigured using minimal equipment. Trevi, who had been skeptical during earlier presentations, now leaned forward with genuine fascination. The clinical precision of the human defensive strategy was unlike anything in Zarin military doctrine. Their communication networks were primitive by our standards, Kaylor explained, but they were also nearly impossible to jam or disrupt. Where we relied on advanced quantum entanglement communications, they used a combination of low-tech radio, encrypted digital channels, and, most surprisingly, old-fashioned human runners and physical message delivery. A sequence of battle footage demonstrated the effectiveness. When advanced electronic systems failed, human units seamlessly transitioned to more traditional communication methods. A soldier physically running a message. Hand signals. Predetermined fallback positions that required no electronic coordination. Redundancy, one of the cadets muttered, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly," Kaylor confirmed. Where we saw complexity as strength, they saw it as a potential weakness. Their systems were designed to function even when individual components failed. The projection showed a harrowing sequence of a human unit operating after their primary communication systems had been destroyed. Instead of falling into disarray, they adapted, used predetermined protocols, and continued their mission with a cohesion that seemed almost supernatural. But their most powerful weapon, Kaylor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, was something no technology could replicate. Something that couldn't be measured by our standard military assessments. The cadets leaned forward, a collective intake of breath filling the room. "Adaptability," he continued. "The ability to learn. To change. To see an obstacle not as an impassable barrier, but as a problem waiting to be solved." The hologram faded, leaving only Kaylor's silhouette against the Academy's pristine background. The room was charged with an electric anticipation, the young Zarin warriors processing a narrative that challenged everything they had been taught about warfare, about strength, about survival. Human spirit unleashed. The Academy's lecture hall had transformed. What began as a military briefing had become something more, a profound exploration of a species that defied conventional understanding. General Kaylor stood at the center of this transformation, his weathered form a living bridge between two civilizations. Captain Roy Carter, Kaylor said, bringing up a holographic image of a human soldier that seemed almost unremarkable at first glance. The kind of warrior you would overlook in a crowded room. Not the tallest. Not the most muscular. No obvious augmentations. No visible genetic enhancements. The image rotated, revealing a man whose strength was not in his physical form, but in the intensity of his eyes. Scars crisscrossed his face, not the clean, precise markings of surgical enhancement, but rough lines that spoke of survival, of battles fought with whatever means necessary. Lyra, the analytical cadet, leaned forward. What made this individual significant? Kaylor's gaze seemed to look beyond the hologram, into a memory that transcended the clinical nature of military records. Leadership is not about physical prowess. It's about the ability to inspire. To transform individual survival into collective resilience. The hologram expanded, showing Carter's unit, a diverse group of humans from different backgrounds, ages, and physical capabilities. Where Zarin military units were genetically optimized for specific combat roles, this human unit looked almost chaotic in its composition. During the Ravage Field's engagement, Kaylor began, Carter's unit was outnumbered 5-1. Their communication systems were destroyed. Their primary defensive positions had been compromised. By all standard military assessments, they should have surrendered. Or been annihilated. The battle footage was brutal. Zarin dropped ships releasing waves of enhanced warriors. Energy weapons that could vaporize solid rock. Biological augmentations that turned soldiers into living weapons. And in the midst of this technological onslaught, a human unit that refused to break. Carter did something our military doctrine could not comprehend, Kaylor explained. When their technological advantages were stripped away, when traditional military hierarchy would have collapsed, he transformed his unit into a living, breathing organism of resistance. The hologram showed Carter moving between positions, not just giving orders, but actively participating. Carrying wounded. Repairing equipment. Coordinating defensive strategies that seemed to emerge organically rather than through rigid command structures. They used everything, Kaylor said. Abandoned equipment became shields. Terrain became weapons. A broken communication device became a signal relay. Where we saw destruction, they saw opportunity. A sequence played out that defied conventional military understanding. Carter's unit, seemingly cornered, began to use the very weapons of their attackers against them. Captured Zarin energy weapons repurposed. Shield generators turned into improvised explosive devices. Trevi, who had been the most skeptical at the beginning of the lecture, now sat with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "How is this possible?" he muttered. Because for humans, Kaylor responded, survival was not an abstract concept. It was deeply personal. Every soldier saw themselves not just as a military unit, but as defenders of something intimate and irreplaceable. The hologram showed personal items recovered from the battlefield. Photographs. Handwritten letters. Small tokens that seemed incongruous in a military context. But Kaylor knew these were not mere objects, they were anchors of humanity. They fought not for abstract concepts of territory or technological supremacy, Kaylor said. They fought for each other. For families. For communities. For a way of life that extended beyond the immediate battlefield. As the projection faded, the room was charged with a new understanding. The young Zarin cadets were no longer seeing humans as a simple conquest, but as a complex, resilient species that challenged every preconceived notion of warfare. Kaylor's final words hung in the air, a challenge and a lesson: strength is not always about what you can destroy. Sometimes, it's about what you are willing to protect. Mercy and understanding. The final chapter of Kaylor's narrative approached something beyond mere military history. It was a story of transformation, not just of battles won or lost, but a fundamental understanding between species. As the holographic displays faded, Kaylor's posture changed. The hard lines of a military commander softened, revealing something more vulnerable. A silence descended upon the Academy lecture hall, a silence pregnant with anticipation. Mercy, Kaylor began, is the most misunderstood weapon in any conflict. The cadets exchanged confused glances. In Zarin military doctrine, mercy was viewed as a weakness, a failure of strategic intent. Yet here was a decorated general preparing to challenge everything they understood about warfare. The projection rekindled, showing a scene that seemed incongruous with the brutal battle footage they had witnessed. It was a moment captured in the aftermath of the Ravage Field's engagement, a wounded Zarin commander, Kaylor himself, confronted by a human medic. "I was beaten," Kaylor recounted. "Critically wounded. My unit destroyed. By all standards of our military engagement, I should have been terminated. Eliminated as a potential future threat." The holographic image showed Captain Roy Carter approaching, his own body marked with wounds, his medical kit partially destroyed. Instead of delivering a final blow, Carter began to treat Kaylor's most critical injuries. "He had every reason to end my life," Kaylor said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We had just decimated his unit. Destroyed his defensive positions. By every metric of our conflict, I was his enemy." Trevi leaned forward, his earlier skepticism completely dissolved. The room held its collective breath. But humans, Kaylor continued, understood something profound about conflict. That an enemy today might be an ally tomorrow. That preservation of life was not a tactical weakness, but a strategic strength. The narrative unfolded, how Carter's actions that day were not an isolated incident, but part of a broader human approach to conflict. Medical teams that treated wounded enemies. Diplomatic initiatives that sought understanding over total destruction. "We came to Earth believing we were bringing civilization," Kaylor said. "We left understanding that civilization is not about technological superiority, but about the capacity for empathy." The final projection showed a remarkable sequence. Human and Zarin diplomatic teams, years after the conflict, working together on joint scientific and exploration missions. The very soldiers who had once tried to destroy each other now collaborating on solving complex interstellar challenges. Lyra, the analytical cadet, finally spoke. "How do you transform an enemy into an ally?" Kaylor's response was simple yet profound. "By seeing their humanity. By understanding that strength is not about how many you can destroy, but how many you can understand." The lecture hall was no longer just a military training ground. It had become a space of philosophical transformation. The young Zarin cadets, who had entered believing in the absolute superiority of their military doctrine, now saw a more complex narrative of conflict and resolution. "The universe is vast," Kaylor said, his final words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "And our greatest strength lies not in our weapons, but in our capacity to learn, to adapt, and most importantly, to understand." As General Kaylor concluded his lecture, something had fundamentally changed. Not just in the cadets' understanding of humans, but in their entire conception of warfare, strength, and civilization. The story of the Zarin-human conflict was no longer just a tale of battle. It had become a profound lesson in the most unexpected forms of resilience.